In the words of Macro, I love Super Smash Bros. But I also love Risk. For those of you that don't know, Risk is a multiplayer board game where you and your friends are given an abridged map of the world, a few cubes, and a ridiculous amount of fake power as you all compete with one another to take over the world. I've been exposed to this game longer than I have to Super Smash Bros., and I use it as an easy party game for me and my nerd friends almost as often as I do Smash Bros. So, today, I will be merging my two passions into one wild game board. Let's begin! You guys might be wondering why exactly I'm doing all this. Well, if you want the cynical answer, I'll have you know that after my second drawing Smash characters video, I put out a poll on what you want me to do for the next video, and nobody responded. Not until 2 weeks later, of course, and if you're watching Ison, drawing Smash Characters 3 is coming after this, I promise. Besides all of this, the Risk game board centers over a frequently overlooked facet of the media in Super Smash Bros., and that's setting. One look at the Risk board and you'll either be confused over the way that certain nations have been divided or conglomerated to serve the purpose of the game, or you'll recognize the thought it took for the developers to take real-life regions and distribute them into evenly massed districts in order to even out the flow of the gameplay. Of course, there's no map of the Super Smash Bros. World. It's a series of interconnected universes all tied into one crossover. So then, how can we represent that on paper? I think I have a few ideas.
That's right. I'm back in the real world for this one. It turns out that when it comes to Smash-themed Risk boards, this is not my first rodeo, which is a sentence that I never anticipated saying, but here we are. I made this Risk board a few summers back, and it is a much different interpretation of combining Smash to Risk than I'm going to achieve today. What sets this model apart, besides the fact that everything was etched out of cringy colored pencil, is the fact that the only series represented here are the ones that had fighters back in the original Smash 64 in 1999. My idea here was that each series would get representation based on the amount of fighters that they currently have in Super Smash Bros., which is why Donkey Kong and F-Zero have 2 and 3, while Super Mario and Pokemon have 8 and 9. I figured that as time went on, I would add the series from later games in the Smash franchise via expansion boards, effectively quintupling the size of this board by the end of it all. However, I came to realize that this was not sustainable, as it would translate to a Risk board with over 150 conquerable territories. Yeah, my math wasn't mathin'. One Risk campaign already takes several hours with 40-ish territories, so I have some new ideas on how to recreate this formula, only better this time.
Okay, so here's my idea. To represent every series in Smash whilst trying to maintain the amount of territories in actual Risk as closely as possible, I've taken the liberty of giving every series in Smash Bros. One territory. If you include the Dr. Mario games as their own separate franchise, that gives us a nice round 40 unique lands to claim on our new board, which is only 2 off from the original game. So, now it would be time to start drawing, but first I had to do a little research. You would think that it would be incredibly easy to just assign a setting to every series in Super Smash Bros., but that couldn't be further from the truth at all. For every Super Mario Bros. Represented in Smash, there's also an Ice Climber. I don't know the settings of each of these series off the top of my head, and even if I've played a few of them, I might only know a few of the many settings that could be used to represent any series. For example, I love Fire Emblem Three Houses, but that's the only Fire Emblem game I've played, so I'm not sure if the subcontinent of Fodlan is important in all of the other 16 games in the franchise. Some of these series I haven't played, and I am not about to spend 100 hours in Persona 5 just for this video. Besides all that, there's even a wealth of series that don't give the player any sort of idea where anything is taking place. Wii Fit, you're in a soulless white void sparsely populated with exercise equipment. In Kid Icarus, you're all over the place, busting a bunch of monsters that look like the enemies in Doom if they got a G-rated overhaul. And in Dr. Mario, you've got a pill jar, the Mustache Man, and they're just there. Where in space and time does R.O.B even exist? What is the Duck Hunt lore? This took me a while to figure out, but once I had it all done, I had this ugliness. 40 series, 40 circles. I figured that to represent the way that all of these conflicting worlds interconnect to create Super Smash Bros., we couldn't simply make all of them earthy landmasses floating about in the ocean. No, not like last time. That made no sense looking back. I also put series that had a fighter debut in the same Smash installment next to each other. and I tried to stick the more obscure franchises in the sides and corners so that they would have the least connections. Splatoon 3 has over 11 million players, so it goes in the middle. It would be generous to say that Ice Climber has 5, off in the corner for you. And that's all of the notes that you'll need to know beforehand. Time to put it all together. Yeah, just kidding. We don't have time for that today. Especially not because this board took a total of 30 hours to develop. Or, more accurately, 29 hours, 22 minutes, and 25 seconds. Let's run through these things in series order, starting with the man, the myth, the Mario, and his 8 friends. And they all live in the Mushroom Kingdom. Yes, things even boomers know about video games for 100. We all know that Mario has castles, right? Some are bigger than others. Some are more iconic than others too, and that's up for debate depending on who you ask. A lot of people probably would have used this slot to depict Peach's castle from Super Mario 64. But you only really see that when you're on the exterior of the building, which isn't that often. I guess you can add a couple more times if you've played Super Mario Odyssey and Mario Kart 64. But do you know what you see every time you complete a level in most 2D Mario games? A little castle that Bowser owns. Just add the flagpole with Mario's flag on it, and you've got the best of both worlds. We'll discuss why Mario has his own sovereign nation another day. Next is Donkey Kong, because he'll always be second to Mario. Never mind, that's Luigi's thing. Screw it, DK, you're third. Anyways, where does this buff bronze banana bolting buffoon belong? Comment down below if you have an alliteration as spicy as that. It's Kongo Falls. Kongo Jungle. Kongo Island. I think that the hidden meaning of the Donkey Kong games being about Donkey Kong overcoming his hubris and greed becomes more apparent the more you look at the face-shaped island DK lives on. Also, even though he lives on a remote tropical island, there are both bustling industry and wintry tundras present in Donkey Kong's habitat. I can't tell whether our favorite ape has it made or lives in his own personal hell. That, or Donkey Kong Country, is really only about a gorilla punching things. It's crazy to think how much that the setting alone is able to reveal. Anyways, I'm done thinking. Let's move on to Zelda. Link lives in Hyrule. Easy, right? Wrong! You see, I played Breath of the Wild for like 1 hour when it came out, and then traded it back into GameStop for 3% of its value after thinking that my copy of the game was completely broken, because I couldn't enter the first shrine for lack of being able to press the A button. My point to you isn't that I suck at video games. I was like 9 after all. My point is that even in that short amount of time, I was able to gather that Hyrule is one massive kingdom, and henceforth, picking one location wouldn't be crazily easy. I spent a lot of time thinking, about 10 seconds, and then remembered, hey, the first Legend of Zelda stage in Smash was the castle, so I can do that, and whoa, that's a lot of castles. Okay, I give up. I'm no Zelda enthusiast, so I chose the one from Ocarina of Time because most people seem to really like that game, and it retains complexity without being overly cluttered like this mess. Zebes for Metroid is a very interesting one. The settings of the Metroid series and its games have never really felt defined by any particular landmark within the mazes of extraterrestrial caverns that Samus has explored, but rather by how they interconnect into a cohesive and beautiful Metroidvania experience. Hence, I thought that the most reasonable plan of attack here would be to choose a setting which represented the series on a larger scale. I chose Zebes, of course, because it serves as a consistent reference point throughout the early titles, as well as in Smash. After all, Samus herself calls it home. Rather than drawing out the map of one of the games, I decided on putting the design of the planet exterior itself onto the world as the orb component. This took a lot of time, so it felt pretty wasteful that it ended up mostly obscured, but hey, if something makes your art feel more complete in any way, even only to you, it's worth it. I should mention that I put Samus's gunship on top as the landmark image so that it looked as if it was landing atop the planet. Yoshi's Island was one of the first domains that I drew, and it has some of the thickest line art as a result. However, that isn't too much of a bad thing considering the arrangement of the island's features, unlike some overcomplicated settings that we will have a very heartfelt discussion about in the latter half of this list. Instead of adding unnecessary details to the larger objects, the game designers found a way to give them character. Every element in Yoshi's Island has a wonderful and cohesive aesthetic that gives the series a distinct charm. That does make me curious as to what it would have felt like if the modern Yoshi games decided to continue looking like the past ones, but the fact that the series as a whole is able to find balance, beauty, beauty and continuity in all of the wildly different art styles that it has experimented with proves to me that the folks at Goodfeel have done their homework studying what made 90s Yoshi great, and understand the value of replicating it in a unique way. Whoa, that got meta. Since that took a few too many brain cells, let's revert to the home of everybody's favorite single-celled organism, Kirby. The Kirby series presents two immediate options to draw in order to represent itself. The first is Green Greens. It's the first place that you go to in almost every Kirby game. It's iconic, it has the little stacked donut-looking landmasses, and almost always ends up with a fight against an apple tree with unresolved trauma. But does Green Greens represent Kirby as a whole? If you ask anybody to name any location from the Kirby games, Green Greens might be a lot of people's first option, but just as many others might say Butter Building, Meta Knight's Halberd, King Dedede's Castle, or whatever intergalactic heckhole that every game undoubtedly devolves to. For this reason, I chose the entirety of Planet Popstar to represent Kirby, since it unites most, if not all, the iconic locations of Kirby. Plus, it's a planet shaped like a 5-pointed star. What could be cooler? After Kirby is StarFox, which represents the first major rift in my video game knowledge, by which I mean even when it came to Zelda and Metroid, which I knew a little about, I really don't know anything about these space furries. I played a little bit of the very first StarFox game, and that was enough to know that the series takes place largely within a network of planets known as the Lilat system, but I didn't think that a goofy-looking abstract interplanetary network would look that great. It would definitely result in a lot of negative space, which is great if you're building a game where the focal point is fighting hordes of space pilot gangs on major routes of transportation, but not if you want a robust centerpiece of a setting. So, I know that the first place you go to in the first game, as well as the first StarFox stage on the select screen in Smash Ultimate, is Corneria. Looking around, I landed on this tower from Star Fox Zero because it seems the most significant while also having a balanced and interesting design. But now it's time to Pokemon Go to the Kanto region. Obviously, out of all the regions in the Pokemon games, Kanto is the most iconic and the most revisited, largely on account of being the first. However, the thing about Kanto, and generally the entire mainline Pokemon franchise, is that the setting is not necessarily defined by landmarks, but by its geography and the interactions with the other dwellers that it provides. So, how are we supposed to depict a setting when the sense of location in the game is dictated by, you are here, figure it out? Simple! We just draw this map. After all, the player spends a lot of time looking at the map of the world in order to figure out where they're going. Much more so than they'll ever spend in any one location. While I want to keep the amount of maps on the board to a minimum, Pokemon has proven that some games can be more constructive with a map than others can be with a landmark.
Okay.
Time to move on. Wait, why did I say
Okay.
like that? Oh yeah, it's because we're talking about Earthbound. I never played the game. I played some of Earthbound Beginnings, but eventually just dropped it, probably because NES games don't feel as exciting as they did 40 years ago. My knowledge is minimal but existent when it comes to the SNES game, which I obviously have to choose over the game that didn't even exit Japan. Sorry, Mother 3 fans. Back to our main focus, Earthbound's Eagle Land is supposed to be a representative of the United States through the eyes of an average preteen, right? It's got a city, a desert, and a tourist trap, but most central are your suburbs. The most iconic of which is Own It, or Won It, or On It, where you start the game. Boot up Smash, and this is the first Mother stage you'll see. In fact, my reference comes directly from said stage because, hey, if I have a good, non-pixelated point of referral, I'll take it, which actually ties nicely into the next domain. The final series to be given a fighter in the original Smash Bros., and ironically one of the first that I drew, is F-Zero. F-Zero has had 3 locations that you can visit in Smash Ultimate. The one nobody remembers the name of, the one everybody hates, and the iconic Mute City, which is so beloved at its core essence that they didn't even have to take it out of 16-bit for Smash. Finding a good reference for Mute City was definitely difficult on account of F-Zero not having had a game in 3 console generations. Most references are fan art or too pixelated or obscure, since F-Zero games are not only old, but so intrinsically focused on the action on the racetrack that the surroundings were basically an afterthought until the third and final mainline game in the series. And even then, it's difficult to get a hard look at things when your car is moving over 1,000 miles an hour, which is canon. But Mario Kart 8 actually lends us a helping hand in this situation by putting a beautiful building front and center on your screen in glorious HD graphics. What else can I say? F-Zero just got saved by a different racing game. Hopefully it gets saved by Nintendo sometime soon. It's time for Melee! Starting with Ice Climber. I know, people, going in with a bang. Talk about using indirect and modern references. This is literally what you see when you go to Ice Climber's one stage in Smash. I don't know who took this and made it this, But it looks like Popo and Nanda's Adventure Grounds aged pretty well. Pretty much everywhere you look, the Mountain and Ice Climber is just referred to as Ice Climber, or Smash's alternative of Summit, which is definitely somewhat of an upgrade, but I found that Smash Wiki lists the Ice Climber's place of origin as something called the Infinite Glacier, which I thought sounded really cool, so I rolled with it. It was hard to smudge the bottom of the piece to have it fade out into the rest of the orb, but I thought that it ended up looking really cool in its smooth blue violet. It's definitely one of my top 3 colors on the board. The Mushroom Kingdom Hospital is definitely something of an oddball in this map when you consider the fact that unlike Yoshi, Donkey Kong, and even Wario, Super Smash Bros. Makes no effort to distinguish the Dr. Mario series from Mario's mainline adventures. But since adding it rounds the number of territories on the board to an even 40, I feel it's justified. Besides, this nifty little clinic definitely stands out as something both truly Mario and yet also quite distinct. This doesn't actually come from the games, though, as I mentioned before. It comes from a comic that Nintendo actually published called The Doctor Is In, Over His Head, part of the final issue of a short-lived 1990 to 1991 series called the Nintendo Comics System. The comics even featured some forgotten characters like Tatanga from Super Mario Land, Uranus from Kid Icarus, and Captain N. You know what? Let's get out of here. Time to whip out your macho swordsman headbands and impractical quasi-medieval attire because we're going to Fire Emblem. When I played my fair share of Fire Emblem, I think it was safe to say that no particular locations made their mark on me. Most of the gameplay takes place on a grid with generic foliage if we're outside or Central Europe seeming architecture if we're inside, which is undoubtedly neat and atmospheric, but doesn't leave too much of a lasting impression. Honing in on a more specific location like Garreg Monastery from Three Houses feels like it would only serve one more recent game, which would be incongruous with the deep and long-standing history of the Fire Emblem games. However, I did find that the first 3 games in the series, as well as the one that literally saved the entire franchise, take place on one generalized continent called Arcania. Serving the purpose of binding the series together and also having a killer name, this had to be my choice. Plus, since we agreed that there are no great landmarks, it's time to bust out those maps, which feels like it makes sense since Fire Emblem deals a lot with precise navigation. Anyways, to round out the melee representation, we have the esteemed enterprise that is Game & Watch. This one also had me at somewhat of a loss to choose a setting. After all, there's so little space that can be utilized on the low-tech LED pads Game & Watch runs on that there's virtually no room to give any of the various locations character. While the minimalism and variety of the series gives it character, it's hard to imagine depicting the goings-on of the Game & Watch people being considered beyond the confines of their dingy little consoles. Even the Flat Zone stage reveals itself to be a literal Game & Watch console. That's when it hit me to draw a literal Game & Watch console. Riveting, I know. But hey, looking back, these things are pretty cool, so it's quite the awesome thing that Smash gives us an outlet to appreciate them without spending hundreds of dollars on eBay. Up next is Kid Icarus. If you know so much as my name, you'll probably know that I love Kid Icarus. After all, it was the same man who got me to spend over 1,650 hours on one game that got me and so many others rushing to the 3DS to experience a funny old NES game that was known before as less of a game and more of a piece of gaming history which nobody really cared about. However, the character of the Kid Icarus Uprising cast is not conveyed that much by its setting. After all, the bulk of your experience is spent in the sky worrying about funny monsters, not to mention the latest drama from your mythical friends and foes playing out on the bottom screen. If I'm going to be entirely honest, I think the location everyone remembers most from the game is Hades' backside, so I did what every die-hard fan does to properly appreciate their series. Google what the setting is called and choose the coolest looking asset from the Palutena's temple stage. I'm not proud of my methods, but I think anyone can see the Greek-inspired architecture embroidered with the hot lady's face and get that that's Kid Icarus. Coming along right after Kid Icarus is Wario, and by right after I mean right after. Wario's reveal for Brawl was approximately 28 seconds after Pits in the E3 2006 reveal trailer. Wario was a peculiar one for this project. I could have gone for the simple cop-out of saying, hey, this is Wario Land, because Wario, but at this point, all anyone seems to care about regarding the garlic-munching goblin is his epic gaming startup. Google tells me that it runs out of a fictitious municipality known as Diamond City, which is a great start, but upon reference research, the only things to be found are either things from the real world or screenshots from modern games which look unexciting if not depressing. I decided to compromise by going back to WarioWare's Game Boy roots and using this screenshot. I know I said earlier I want to avoid un-HDified references as much as possible, but I think the originality that it brings to the table more than makes up for it. It's about showtime that we discuss Metal Gear Solid. Shadow Moses Island is the setting of the first game in this series, or spin-off series, or sub-series, or whatever type of thing that Kojima made this thing up to be in his never-ending quest to confuse the players. Is it Snake? Is it not Snake? What state of matter is this Snake? Oh, who am I kidding? I'll need to save my qualms with lore until we get to Kingdom Hearts. For now, I just want to think about how this desaturated blue tint adds to the brutalist aesthetic of the militaristic architecture of Shadow Moses Island, adding to the gravity of one of the coolest feeling stages in Smash Bros. Every time I looked for good ways to represent Shadow Moses Island, I found the same little structure that appears as said stage, just waiting to be torn down by a Metal Gear. It's certainly one of the more detailed parts of the map, but I had a lot of fun recreating its geometric patterns. Going from one groundbreaking third-party inclusion to the next, Sonic the Hedgehog is up next. Even before I began drawing, I knew that Sonic was going to get a loop-de-loop from Green Hill Zone, and that it was going to like it. What I didn't know, however, was the name of the island where all of the stages in the original 1991 game lay, on an islet known as South Island. While this is definitely a lesser-known location name, it felt right to me, being bigger than the too-specific Green Hill Zone, and smaller than the far-too-generalized Planet Mobius. And yes, this is another reference ripped straight from Smash. The layout of the arena may seem forgettable for Sonic fans who wish the series had more stages in Smash, but it does a great job of capturing all of the features of one of gaming's most iconic levels. Besides a loop, it's got a half-pipe, a checkpoint, some plant life, and a 1-up sitting just out of reach. After Sonic was Pikmin, which feels like an odd choice for a fighting game, but after seeing the Pikmin subreddit, I think that appeasing the game's insatiable fanbase was for the best. All of the Pikmin games take place on a planet known as PNF 404. Say that 10 times fast. However, until Pikmin 3, this planet didn't have a name, which is why the stage in Smash, which I once again used as my reference, is just labeled as Distant Planet. Keeping with the idea established by Zebes earlier in this video, you can see part of what PNF 404 looks like underneath the main landmarks. I figured that this would be a fun little thing to do for all of the series that have their main settings be planets, but this and Zebes are the only ones to receive that treatment, excluding only Corneria, because the only times you see that planet from space, it's just, oh boy, clouds. The last new series to be revealed for Brawl wasn't much of a series at all. It was the real-world robotic toy, R.O.B, everybody's favorite robotically operated buddy. R.O.B being considered as his own series due to such ambiguities is fine and all for Smash, but in our case today, things are going to have to get complicated. Despite the apparent significance of the peripheral, which saved all of gaming by helping the NES masquerade as a toy to fool idiotic American retailers, R.O.B only ever worked with 2 games, Gyromite and Stack Up. The focal point of these obscure experiences sure wasn't R.O.B, it was one Professor Hector, sometimes accompanied by his brother Vector. The particular whereabouts of these mad scientists remain unknown, so the mere confines of their laboratory will have to do for now. Just conjure up the layout of any area of the lab and boom! We've got a space on the board where R.O.B can feel at home. Alright, to my folks that are still here, we've officially made it to the halfway point of this map. Trust me, screenwriter Patu is feeling this just as much as you are right now. Beginning Smash 4 with a bang, we've got Animal Crossing, which really doesn't have its own setting. After all, the whole point of the game is that you create the setting, leading even the stage in Smash to be personalized and named to the fighting game. Since that's a pretty dicey option, I chose to go the modern route by using Animal Crossing New Horizons as my basis, which weirdly enough, isn't the first time I've done that. This rendering of the island is just a generic map of what you start off with in the game, spruced up with some fixtures of note, like the Town Hall. Nook Inc. Getaway Package is tied with the Mushroom Kingdom Hospital for the longest name thus far, but things might change by the end of the video. Time to slide with my dog like I'm Mega Man into, well, Mega Man. Mega Man and his family of Dr. Light's questionable creations live in a futuristic metropolis known as Mega City, because sometimes everything has to be named after the main character. Well, you and I can probably agree that the Mega City skyline has never been all too iconic for the Blue Bomber. We do see some of the urban jungle's prized architecture in what might be Mega Man's most well-known moment ever, the Mega Man 2 title screen. This is literally that, only I reflected the building and adjusted accordingly so that the edge wouldn't be awkwardly cut off like we see in the real deal. My only question left is, how does he get down from there? That's gotta be something of a drop. Following one of the icons of gaming is one of the industry's black sheep, Wii Fit. This is another one that I made fun of earlier for looking like a storytime animation made by a SoulCycle coach. Taking from mostly the things you see laying in the background of Smash's Wii Fit Studio stage, you've got such instruments of torture as a cycling machine, a treadmill, as well as an oversized yoga mat and a frightening manifestation of the Wii Fit trainer herself, exercising her authority over this fragmented world. Pun very intended. This specific part is the only landmark on the map, to my recollection, to have some low opacity white airbrushing behind it to make it stand out from the edge of its orb. I think that this corner of the board is a great reflection of the WFT's function in Smash, being a waste of space. And if that hot take makes you want to punch things, this next location might just be the perfect place for you. This one is more straightforward than it looks. While every level in Punch-Out might confuse the series' sense of setting by taking place in a different venue across the world, there is still continuity in the fact that every fight takes place in the same boxing ring. That is, until you advance beyond the minor and major circuits to land Little Mac in the World Circuit, the World Video Boxing Association's most important venue, thus being the one I chose. And yes, I know that Super Punch-Out on the SNES has an even higher special circuit, but they don't have Donkey Kong, do they? Plus, those older Punch-Out games were pretty racist, but that's a conversation for another day. You know who isn't racist? Pac-Man! Gosh, these segues are getting worse and worse by the minute. Anyways, Pac-Man doesn't give me as many choices as I would have hoped. We know that the yellow dot muncher lives in Pac-Land, but that's pretty much a given. Just put the word Pac in front of anything, and that's what you get with Pac-Man. The Pac person who lives in Pac-Land with Mrs. Pac-Man, Junior Pac-Man, and Baby Pac-Man eating Pac-Dots from the Pac-Maze and was trained by a Pac-Master in the game Pac-and-Roll to protect the Pac people of Pac Village. That is all lore accurate. As for what I chose to draw, as much as I would have loved to draw the parking garage that Pac-Man chases Adam Sandler in during everybody's favorite movie Pixels, I went with the center of the Pac-Maze, as well as a house from Pac-Land, Pac-Man's most iconic ventures. In this paragraph, I said the word Pac approximately 21 times. Starting here is officially where my job became 10 times more difficult. This back 30% of the Smash Bros. Roster features primarily games that are either enhanced in realistic detail on account of being more modern, or on account of being owned by third-party developers with a much less cartoony vibe than Nintendo. This first major obstacle in that respect was by far my most major, being Xenoblade Chronicles. This game takes place on the frozen bodies of two massive titans, one which grew so much mold that a bunch of South Englanders ended up on it, and the other is crawling with steampunk Terminators. Both are covered in detail, which made me resort to setting my brush width to a literal pixel. This territory has a number of details which can only be seen so up close that there were only a handful of images online with the sheer resolution available to convey the Bionis and Mechonis' features. But I think everything came out looking nice in the end. Next is the one outlier to the argument I just made, being Duck Hunt. Smash itself does no favors in giving information on the setting, which, according to the stage select screen, has the same name as the fighter and series it came with. That is, unless you're playing the PAL version of the game, but that name is wrong because they're not a duo, they're a trio. The duck, the dog, and the person with the zapper gun, Mr. Sis. Anyways, whereas with Ice Climber I stumbled across a little-known, probably unofficial name, here I just made one up. This is the hunting grounds, because you're hunting. Riveting, I know. Complete with a bush, a tree, a bird whose life is currently flashing before its eyes, and some grass which hasn't gotten mowed in years. This setting is unmistakably Duck Hunt. Moving on is the first DLC character for Smash. Original DLC character for Smash was Ryu. No, different Ryu. That's not even a Ryu, that's a Ryo! Now we're getting too far off track. We're talking about Street Fighter, the guy with the white gi and the red headband. He and all of his other impossibly muscular frenemies belong in Metro City, which was the focal point of Street Fighter Final Fight, and is making a strong comeback as the setting of Street Fighter 6. After years of bouncing around the world in search of Shadaloo, Metro City is finally here to serve as a cohesive and consistent setting for Street Fighter. This particular stadium comes from the latest game's story mode, and I only used it because it looked nice. The truth is, I haven't played any Street Fighter 6, so if any of you guys have further insight onto what exactly the Mike Hagar Memorial Stadium is, that'd be much appreciated. Until then, let's talk about a game that I know a lot more about, Final Fantasy VII. While Kid Icarus may be where I derive my persona, the video game that had the most impact on myself as a gamer outside of Smash is undoubtedly Final Fantasy's blockiest installment. I was super excited but also daunted by the task of making the FF7 area. I wanted deeply to do it justice, and that got increasingly difficult upon being painfully reminded that the game is from 1997 and is rendered in 32-bit. You think my focus would then shift to the remake for better renders, but I actually used a plastic diorama made by Square Enix themselves for the game's 25th anniversary. As complicated as this megastructure is, I love the way that the Shinra building is juxtaposed with the slums of the rest of Midgar to artistically convey the crazy power dynamic of the city. Hopefully it doesn't get any murderous cloaked demigod intruders anytime soon. The next DLC for Smash 4 was Corrin, but they suck, so we're moving straight on to the Bayonetta series. I really don't know anything about this racy Umbra witch other than the wake of death and destruction she left in Smash 4, so I had to consult Google for this one. It looks like old Bayo Seasoning here resides in a gothic city-state known as the City of Deja Vu. But you all know that I'm too lazy to type out all of those letters, so I marked it down under its legal name, Vigrid. Vigrid seems to have an economy driven by a pitifully vague industry driven by the first game's main antagonist. The particular landmark that I chose doesn't serve any importance to my knowledge, but rather comes from a piece of concept art for the game. Because it was already a drawing, it proved much easier to format and render than the in-game screenshots, and I think that its architecture does a great job regardless of representing what Bayonnaise is all about. I don't think that it'll surprise anybody that Inkopolis is the location that I chose for Splatoon. As much as I actively participated in Splatoon 2's final Splatfest to implement the Splatlands as the setting for the third game, Inkopolis has undoubtedly left its mark on the first two and even returned to the third as a pitiful precursor to the Side Order DLC. This particular version of Inkopolis Square is that of the original Splatoon, of course. While I personally have more fond memories of the second game, as I never owned a Wii U, it's definitely cool to see that the original game had a neat lime green tower instead of just consumerism! Inkopolis is a really cool looking city. It will truly be a shame when the tanks show up to eviscerate Little Judd. The only other series to be introduced in the base game of Smash Ultimate with not one, but two fighters, although technically still one fighter, was Castlevania! It's kind of interesting to think that the game's genre was named after itself and Metroid, but the two IPs only came together for the first time in Ultimate. Regardless, Castlevania was another infuriatingly detailed obstacle in the making of this game board. For one, the series strives for realism in order to enhance its sense of gothic horror, which all comes to a boil at Dracula's castle. However, there are no super great renders available of the castle, so I was left to take the Netflix poster, raise up the brightness, and assume features like I never had before. You might also be wondering why exactly those words down there don't read Dracula's castle if that's what I drew. It turns out that the series takes place in a great value version of Transylvania called Wallachia, which was largely made known by the aforementioned TV series, but has also made its mark on the games. Another game with a setting based closely on a real-world place is Persona 5, which takes place in literal Tokyo. In fact, many of the places the player goes to in the game exist in the real world. However, I thought it would feel really weird if the Persona domain was only referred to as Tokyo, since that would connote that we're talking about the real place where a lot of these games are being developed, including the Atlas headquarters itself. Anyways, my simple fix to that was just to slap 20XX at the end of the title in reference to the in-game calendar. Additionally, to further avoid tying oddly grounded connections to the real world, the setting I chose to represent Persona 5's Tokyo was Shujin Academy, where Joker himself goes to school, since that place was made up for the game. Unlike Persona 5, the fantastical world of Dragon Quest XI is completely and utterly made up. Now we enter the domain of Erdrea, the spelling of which changes depending on who you ask. While many interpretations replace the I with an E, many also used the 9th letter of the alphabet, which I stuck with, because correct Latin pronunciations are based. Plus, you know what else is based? When the fantasy world's got a giant freaking tree in the middle. That's right, the centerpiece of the Dragon Quest stage is the massive floating tree that can be seen in the background of the Smash Ultimate stage, because I am not about to spend tens, if not hundreds more hours of my life coming to understand the lore of a prolific 11-game JRPG series. If there are any Dragon Quest fans in the comments, back up my choice or spit in my face accordingly down below. Shameless plug aside, revealed as Fighter Pack 3 directly after Hero at E3 was Banjo and Kazooie. Although E3 has since shriveled up and died, the hype for this character getting announced will always feel alive. Less exciting than that, however, was the no-brainer of a choice to include Spiral Mountain as the setting to represent Banjo-Kazooie on this game board. As much as I would have loved to include a location exclusive to the absolute masterpiece of a reboot, Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, something deep inside me told me that that may not have been the best idea. Besides, every detail of Spiral Mountain is iconic, especially the giant stony Gruntilda head that the player is supposed to walk into? Yeah, I've never played the game, but Spiral Mountain still leaves a great impression as an unforgettable hub world. Moving on, we first had South Island, and now we have South Town, a staple community from the Fatal Fury and King of Fighters games. This area, as well as the domains for Castlevania and Kingdom Hearts, could have been red, but ultimately became other colors in order to create more variety on the map. I think this worked out for the best, as Southtown ended up being one of the coolest colors on the board. You might also notice that King of Fighters is the third and final series to get a map as its landmark. Southtown does have a bridge that could have been used, but it seems to only exist as a stage background as it has never been rendered in a format by which its full appearance can be judged. Its many maps, however, make this the perfect choice. Rounding out Fighter Pass 1 was Byleth, but they're another stinky Fire Emblem character, so we're gonna move on to a series which people were actually excited to see join Smash. Oh wait. That's right, we went from an old underappreciated Nintendo series to a new one. Despite the very unalive state of the game today, there's no doubt that this experimental experience was pretty awesome, and so are its many stages. The one that took the spot, though, had to be Spring Stadium, since, let's face it, it's the only one anyone can name. That alone, however, isn't the only reason that that was the name I chose for the space. I did a fairly extensive amount of research, even looking through those little images that they had in the game to reveal all of the hidden lore. But no matter how hard I looked for the name of the world that ARMS takes place in, nothing came up. Maybe I'll get some help from my ARMS superfans watching, but who am I kidding? Those don't exist. Here's the part of the video that I know some of you have been waiting for, or more realistically skipped to, Minecraft! Can you believe it, guys? It's Minecraft from Minecraft! Isn't this so Minecraft? Jokes aside, this is just the Minecraft world stage from Smash. Remarkably, this is only the second time in the last 10 paragraphs that I've ripped the landmark for a space directly from Smash. And you can bump that number up to 12 if you want to consider the remaining 2. I don't have too much to say about this one, but it was nice to take a break from worrying about how smooth all of my strokes were and just use the line tool for a solid 30 minutes. Also, making this helped me realize how many elements of your standard Minecraft server that Smash was able to fit into one stage. From one level of seriousness to a very different one, the first new series to get a fighter in 3 whole fighter packs after Steve-O came on the scene was Tekken, with the very good father figure Kazuya Mishima. These games never seem to take place in any particularly important spot in the Tekken world other than at the games themselves, by which I mean Mishima Zaibatsu's King of the Iron Fist tournament. Indeed, the tournament has such a poor sense of identity, constantly transferring ownership, that it's been at a loss to conclude ever since the 6th game. I personally blame Yggdrasil for having come into existence at exactly that time, which weirdly enough is not the only thing called Yggdrasil now connected to Smash thanks to Ultimate's DLC. It's funny how many things can get into Smash now, like Disney? My goodness, have we made it to the end of the Smash timeline already? Oh boy, does 3.5 weeks of script writing go fast. That's right, folks. It took me this long and I still can't make something halfway good. But you know who can? Square Enix! That's right, folks, it's not getting any better. As funny as it would have been to make the Kingdom Hearts area of the board just be a Disney movie, Kingdom Hearts has its own fair share of original settings. The first one anyone probably thinks of being the first one the player goes to after getting their sandy bum off Destiny Island, Traverse Town. This area serves as a perfect crossroads between what Sora is familiar with and the crazy world of talking animals and anime swordsmen that he joins over the course of a very convoluted plot before being stopped in his tracks by an unbeatable final boss. Screw you, Maleficent. And with that being said, you and I have now lost a considerable amount of time to this stupid project. With a good amount of series on the way, you might even be wondering at this point, why would I even go through with all of this trouble? Well, as many series as I have going on this channel already, I'm just happy that I was able to share with you all of the little things that I wanted to do, this included.
Anyways, to conclude, here we are again in the real world, only I've got a completely new game board to show off to you all. It's full of crazy, terrible imperfections, as is every other piece of art I've made for this channel, which is as infuriating as it is fitting. If you want one of your own, I may not be able to produce and ship them on my own to you, but a high-resolution PDF is available in the description below if you feel like making your own. Thank you, all of you wonderful creatives, for watching, and always remember, they keep a dead body on display in Philadelphia that turned into soap instead of decaying. Also, Jesus loves you, and goodbye!